All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back. I am very excited to have back Christine Forner. Christine, welcome back.
Hi, thank you, Guy. It's really nice to be back.
Awesome. So Christine has over 30 years of clinical experience offering effective and distinctive counseling. For the past 20 years, she specialized in working with individuals with trauma, post-traumatic stress disorders, traumatic dissociation, developmental trauma, dissociative disorders, and the effects of stress on the physical, emotional, mental, and imaginative aspects of our beings. Christine is a contributing author and correct me if I'm wrong, it's soon to be published
Soon to be
soon to be
published.
published book.
I
It's
took a
called
picture of it.
Behind the Curtain, Women Therapists Get Real About Healing Trauma. And that's by Susan Pease Bannett.
Yeah, that's the editor. Yep.
Okay, the editor. So welcome back.
Hi.
So remind our listeners, maybe who didn't catch one of the previous interviews, where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm originally from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I'm currently in Alberta, Canada. This is my home, and it's very chilly today. That's why I have the sweater on. It's
Okay.
I think it's 35 below right now.
What?
Yeah, that's Celsius. No, it's only a minus 28.
Oh my God. Do you
I
have
don't
snow?
that's probably that's I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit.
Oh my God. Well, do you have snow?
Yeah.
You do. Jesus.
Yeah,
I,
we were very mild up until 2 days, getting a little concerned. And then, careful what you wish for. It's very cold and it'll be cold for the next couple of days, but that's a normal Canadian winter up here.
okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
can't complain, I guess. Excuse me. All right. So, well, let's start talking about this book and then I want to segue into, you have a workshop on dissociation. It's called Dissociation 101 that's coming up in March. We'll talk about that. We'll have that linked up. Um, talk to us about this book, how you got involved and so forth.
From my understanding, I know Suzanne or Susan from the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, and she was watching one of those big conferences that get sold online with all these major headliners. And she realized that a vast majority of them were men, and a vast majority were sort of kind of all saying the same thing. And so she reached
Mm.
out. Sorry for the rumbling. My dogs are chewing on bones to make sure that they don't bark and be really loud. So if it's bothersome, I'll figure something out. But
We're pet friendly here.
awesome. Um, and she approached me and said that it was just really upsetting that there was no real strong feminist voice. And I was like, I'm your gal. My original training back in the 90s was a women's studies degree. So I graduated in 95. So I would have been one of the first years of people who were graduating with a women's studies degree ever, because the women's studies degrees started showing up in the mid to late 80s. And then you need 3 or 4 years to graduate. So I would have been in the class, third class, fourth class, something like that. So my original training is in women's studies. And then I started specializing in dissociation. And then I started specializing in mindfulness. And I also at the time started coming up around that same time with a theory of the origin of misogyny and patriarchy that was unlike anything else, based on what I know from the field of dissociation and the field of mindfulness. And so I jumped at the opportunity
Mm.
to start writing out a thesis I've been developing, or a hypothesis that I've been developing. And so I wrote the chapter, I think in January 2021. So it's been like 3 years
Oh,
since I've written that. And I've written quite a bit more since then. I've thought this out a lot more. I've been interviewed quite a few times about this. And I think I'm really on to something. And so I remember our last conversation was right at the beginning of COVID. And you said to me, Christine, you really say things I've never heard before. And I think it's because of the weird combination of understanding dissociation, understanding mindfulness, all sitting on a foundation of feminist theory. So, yeah, it is weird, really weird.
so I think we all can resonate with what Susan said regarding her observation of, you know, these online summits, and
Yeah.
we see the same people. Not to take
Yes.
away from them, but we see the same people oftentimes. So she said a lot of them are saying the same thing. And then I want to contrast that with
Yeah.
what you're learning. What are they saying?
Well, you have very typical Bessel van der Kolk. We can never, ever, ever dismiss the contribution that that man has had to the world. Much of what I've built my theory on is the information that came from him. He was talking about trauma is in the body, and that in order to heal this stuff, we really need to have safety in others. This is a theory that sort of gets shared by Porges. His polyvagal theory supports this as well. The attachment theory supports this as well. But there's never really a stopping and a pausing of talking about the misogyny of all this, of human trauma. There's never a pause and going, wait a minute, where did that come from? It's just sort of this grand global assumption that human violence is normal. And it
Hmm.
isn't. There's not an ounce of it that is normal. It's been normalized, but neurophysiologically, neurobiologically, it isn't. That's why we experience trauma. Like if we were designed to be in this kind of world and to be raised these ways, it wouldn't bother us.
So let me just pause you there. So
Yeah.
just so I'm clear. So you're saying that what hasn't even been taken into consideration is the misogyny and
Yes.
how that the effect or the impact that is having. S-
Yes.
Be more specific.
Okay.
Unfold
So
that.
so most people make the assumption, and it's what misogyny is defined as, is the hatred of women. I've actually taken a step further back and added human attachment, human trauma, and human mindfulness into that. And what I actually see misogyny as is the phobia and the disdain of human nurturing. Another language is the disdain of human regulation and co-regulation and self-regulation. We don't get it, we don't understand it, and we punish it often, or in many cases, rape it and murder it when it comes really
Mm,
down to how common femicide is. When you really take a look at how common sexual assault is, when you take a look at how common childhood sexual abuse is, it's mind-boggling common. And we don't really ask the question, where does it come from?
mhm.
We just assume that it's just here and it's normal. So we don't even take a look at, okay, so misogyny, which is about 8 to 10,000 years old, we don't really know where it comes from. There's some theories. I have some theories, but it clearly popped up about 10,000 years ago. Renee Eisler, she wrote the book Chalice and the Blade. She does a great job of describing this historically and through archaeology and anthropology. And clearly there is something really wonky that happened 5 or 10,000 years ago. And then violence started to happen. And then um, empires started to happen, wars started to happen. All of these things started to happen post whatever misogyny is. And the how we can trace misogyny is the art changed. There was no army for fortifications. Now all of a sudden there's army fortifications. The symbolism started to change where instead of women being the same size or a little bit larger, they became smaller or invisible or absolutely gone. You can really see that there was a drastic change in how we functioned about 10,000 years ago.
Mhm.
My question is, what was that? Why was that? I've been very curious about this my whole adult life. And um, it's so strange because all trauma therapists, or the big trauma therapists, will talk about how important safe relationship is. They'll really talk about psychodynamic, psychoanalytic notion of having that safe person reflecting and not judging you. That's pretty
Right.
common when we start getting into the really complex and dissociative stuff. So how is it that the thing that seems to heal us, this nurturing relationship, isn't talked about in psychology schools? It isn't talked about in psychiatry. It isn't considered to be anything when you consider like what CBT is. CBTs being the most common. I was going to go to school. I was going to school to become a neuroscientist. I went to get my master's in applied neuroscience. Couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand what they were teaching. It was so awful. It was so
Mhm.
antiquated. It was all CBT, all about how thinking is so like the be all and end all of us as a species, and it isn't.
Right.
Especially when you start going into the world of trauma and dissociation, you start to recognize that thinking goes out the window when we start to become extremely traumatized. So, like, to me, I'm like, okay, so we know in the trauma world that being nurturing actually helps this stuff. Why doesn't the rest of the world know this? And I think that's because of misogyny. I think that's because there's such a disdain and phobia against human nurturing that we don't even really know what it is anymore, that we couldn't even possibly recognize how we used to be before the advent of misogyny. Mindfulness is where we start to get clues on what that would have been like, but not the mindfulness that people are talking about, because the mindfulness that people are talking about is the patriarchal version of mindfulness. So what do I mean by patriarchy? A lot of people say that it's the social organization by men for men, and we exclude women from it. I actually think that patriarchy is better understood as a very small group of psychopaths making the world in their image. So that both men and women, most humans are not psychopathic.
Right.
There might be a few who are psychopathic adjacent, meaning that they have the traits, but it's not innate. It's not the brain damage that seems to happen with people who are born psychopathic. These are people who are made, right? And so that comes from a traumatic experience. That comes from a traumatic childhood. That comes from lack of nurturing. That comes from misogyny. So in a world that has been entirely traumatized, the people who do the best are the worst of us, the psychopaths. They're the ones who have made the rules. They're the ones who've made capitalism. They're the ones who've made our politics. They're the ones who've made our education systems. They're the ones who've made everything in their image. And we are all born and raised to think that that is just amazing, to be aloof and unemotional and devoid of the dependency on other people. Right? They're moving on to their second treats. And when a human is traumatized and there's no nurturing afterwards, we're going to be messed up. We're going to be emotional. We're going to be all over the place, because human trauma is pain. It's pain and suffering that is not tended to. So another thing that I like to say is that trauma isn't actually the event. Trauma is the lack of nurturing after the fact. If that nurturing comes, we're not going to be traumatized. If the nurturing doesn't come, we will be, because the body will get stuck in the active defenses that we experience as a species. So there's a paper, I can send it to you because it's open access.
That'd be great.
But it's basically fear and the cascade defenses. And it really talks about how different cascade defenses, active or inactive, affects everything inside of us. And a lot of the research from the field of dissociation supports this, that the brain, certain brain areas turn off. Other brain areas become hyper aroused when they're supposed to be normal. So if we go into a active state of flee, for example, the front brain structures turn off, the back brain structures turn on. So we're hyper affectively aware. We're feeling, panicking, terrified. If we go into an inactive state of dissociation, everything gets shut down. The front brain becomes hyper aroused. So we think a lot, but we don't feel. All the feeling stuff gets cut off or anesthetized by the neurochemistry and the neuroelectricity. The thalamus, which is an organ that is supposed to amalgamate our sense perceptions. So what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we smell, all goes into a cohesive narrative. When we dissociate, that gets scattered. So what we see, what we hear gets separated. This is probably what auditory and visual hallucinations are. They're bits and pieces of data that aren't connected to anything else. And so when we go into these emergency responses, underneath all of them is a very active central nervous system. It's inflamed, it's on fire, it's a live wire, and it hurts. Dissociation is the neurochemistry we use to stop that pain from being processed. Not that we're not feeling it, we're not aware that we feel it. So this is This is sort of where the world of dissociation and mindfulness start to really bash up, because mindfulness is about awareness. Dissociation is about no awareness. So when we move into these places, it's really hard to come out. So when you go into this numbed place, you're not really feeling what you're feeling. You're not really knowing what you're knowing. You're not processing. You're not putting the pieces together. When we start to heal, we start to feel. I know that sounds really corny because I know it rhymes, but the truth is, when we start to heal, when our bodies innately, naturally start to try and get us out of these emergency states, we're going to start to feel things and we're going to start reacting. This has been called mental illness in our world. In a patriarchal, misogynistic world, natural responses get seen as unnatural. Because psychopathic people, they don't feel. And when they start to heal and start to feel, they go and hurt people in order to not feel. But the rest of us feel it. We start to fall apart. It gets knee buckling painful. But we get told that's wrong and bad when actually it's super healthy. What really is missing when it comes to the world of trauma is how we get people out of this beginning phase of feeling and knowing to a place of absolute resolution, the nurturing place. And that's what is missing in this world, is how we utilize our innate nurturing capacities to help people out of this.
All right, let's pause here for a second. We're speaking with Christine Forner. We'll pause a second to thank our sponsors. So, Christine, this is fascinating. Every time I talk to you, I'm like, damn. Um, this topic and subject of misogyny, how does that play into the treatment process?
All of our natural ways of healing are denied, dismissed, disliked, treated as suspicious, treated as not effective, treated as bad, wrong. So it sabotages all treatment, because we're taught to try to fix things from a psychopathic perspective, not to fix things from a nurturing, non-misogynistic, non-patriarchal perspective. And so most of the time it won't work, because we're trying to get people to behave like psychopaths rather than the humans that we are.
Be more specific in terms of
Okay,
treatment
so
modalities or interventions.
so all of cognitive behavioral therapy is the belief that you have to change. If you change your thinking, if you change your perspective, everything is going to be okay. That is undeniably false. The needs that we have, if we have been traumatized, is to be assisted in just the right way. And that's the hard part of us figuring out what is the right way, but in just the right way to assist that human to work through what the body's doing to heal. So for example, if you go into an active state of defense like flight, you're going to be flooded with neurochemistry and neuroelectricity that is powerful and strong. And this is all the PTSD, HPA axis, all that kind of stuff. The neurochemistry that gets secreted out of the body not only gets secreted in the gut and the bloodstream, it also gets secreted out of our bone marrow. So it's in our saline solution, these powerful, toxic, strong chemicals that are all about doing something to survive a near-death experience. To come out of that chemistry has to get out of our body. Because it's in our saline solution, right? We're not going to be able to pee or poop out these chemicals. Like if it was just in our guts, we would. If it was just in our bloodstream, we would. But it's in everything, in our skin, in our hair, it's in everything. And that has to get out. And the way that it gets out is by crying, bawling, shaking, emoting loudly, right? So what happens if you go into a therapist's office and you sit down and you start going, that's going to get shut down real quick, fast. The therapist isn't comfortable with it,
Right.
and the world isn't terribly comfortable with it. but that's what we need. And instead of everybody pulling and shutting it down like we are taught,
Mm-hmm.
changing your perspective like we are taught, what's really needed is the therapist has to move in and dial in to that person and figure out, what does this body need to feel slightly safer while it's expressing incredible wordless pain.
Mm-hmm.
Our job is to co-regulate that person in front of us, not to dismiss it. The way that DBT is now, I don't think this is the way Marsha Lanahan had it planned, but the way that it's been transferred now in the masses, it's all about avoidance, all about distraction. Let's distract you to not think about this. Let's get you thinking about something else. And that's avoidance. And for a lot of humans, that's reenactment, because when
Mm-hmm.
we were little and having these original upsets, however we were met in those upsets is how we learn to meet ourselves and how other people will meet us. So for example, you freak out like this as a kid in a very, very like coercively controlling home, or a home with a psychopath, that's going to get shut down real quick by being hit, being ignored, being punished, being shamed, all of those kind of things. So teach that person to take that neurochemistry of fight or flight and shame it ourselves. We're not teaching people how to hold space, slow down, how to ourselves become mindful to help that person work through the large emoting affect. People with dissociation, like DID, they're not very demonstrative. It's really hard to tell what's going on inside of them, because the inside is like making those sounds, but the outside is very flat.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to do is try to help people learn how to feel safe expressing it, so they're not going to get in trouble. That's the, like, tons of nurturing goes into this, of paying attention and attuning and being with and not getting scared, not reacting to that person's terror. So a non-misogynistic, non-patriarchal way is figuring out how this person can freak out however they want to in a safe place where they're scaffolded, and not us immediately calling the ambulance or trying to give pills, sorry,
No
or
worries.
trying to give them pills,
So are we
right?
talking about the somatic modalities we hear about?
Somatic modalities are very good, but I mix my somatic modalities with something that me and three other women. So I know you know Lisa Danilchuk. I don't know if you know Rochelle Sharp-Larasby. I think she's been on your show before.
She
There's
has,
another
yeah.
woman named Damgard. So the four of us got together, and I was trying to describe all that I've learned about mindfulness, and that mindfulness is really actually true mindfulness is more about secure attachment than it is about the Buddhist understanding of mindfulness. Mindfulness really is a way for one human being to understand what's happening inside the body of another human being. I think true absolute mindfulness is the language of the Homo sapien mother. And for her to be in that state all the time for her offspring, she needs to be kept safe and secure. That means food secure, environment secure, relational secure. Everything has to be secure so that she can give all her attention to her offspring. So I was talking to Lisa and Rochelle and Marie, and I was like, what can we call this? And so we're throwing around names, and Lisa goes, what about securefulness? So Lisa, Marie, Rochelle, and I came up with the word securefulness. And Lisa and I have actually written about it. And I sort of write about it in, now I write about it in quite a few things, that the therapist, if they're in a self-nurturing state of securefulness, that itself is going to start the healing process. Because that person's who's in front of you, their central nervous system is going to recognize that the person in
Mm-hmm.
front of them is safe and secure, and the dissociation is going to go away. The emergency responses are going to go away, and what's ever underneath them are going to come out seeking care. So a lot of times when we're working with clients and we notice that they're doing well, and then all of a sudden, like, they're not, and we see that as regression. My understanding of it is actually that's progression, that they're starting to feel that this is my
Mm-hmm.
stuff, that these are my experiences. Oh my God, I didn't know it was that bad, because dissociation makes it so that we don't know it's that bad. The
Mm-hmm.
emergency responses make it so that we don't know how bad it is. And when we start to realize how bad it is, we're going to start to freak out a lot. And healing people is supporting them in your secureful state, trying to teach them, how do you become self-aware? And then nurture however you need to be nurtured in a way that gets you to a place where your central nervous system is happy again. Right? The central nervous system is born and raised to be happy.
Yeah.
It's not designed to be dysregulated.
As you're speaking, I can hear the difference between a lot of what is talked about in terms of the treatment of trauma, different modalities and interventions and so forth. Um, this is very interesting to me. So can people learn about this through writings you've done?
Yeah, I can send, there's a couple articles that I can write about. Um, Most of the writing, I've been hammering out the theory of misogyny and patriarchy from a trauma lens, which I think, like, even the most wisest of feminists, they're not trauma informed. Like, we really do not talk about dissociation like ever. And
Mhm.
dissociation is the most common problem. It's what all children do. Everybody's dissociating, and we have to be dissociating pretty intensely in a patriarchal, misogynistic world. We have to be, because it's just, you can't be fully aware of how awful it is, especially if you don't know how to manage, regulate that awareness. Mindfulness is one of our backup plans that helps us regulate ourselves no matter what. But it's kind of hard to regulate yourself if you're experiencing coercive control, if you're trying to, if you're dealing with a lot of financial stress, if, I can give a million hundred examples of how difficult it is to be in this world and be aware. So a lot of my writing is about the theory of it. Treatment is something I'm going to be teaching a lot more. I'm teaching a class in March about dissociation 101, sort of covers the field of dissociation, why you don't know about it, and what you can do from it. And then there's going to be treatment in the afternoon. And then I think I'm going to be doing another class in June about dissociation and mindfulness. It'll be online. Both of these are a webinar. And then I think I'm looking at a date in September where people can actually come, and it's going to be very much like a self-help, self-improvement style, of course, where I actually show people how to do this, because it's really hard to, like I can give people the theory,
Hmm.
but if you don't actually do, you're not going to know what it is, because doing is extraordinarily different than the theory. I think most people have the theory. Well, a
Right.
lot of people have the theory. Well, no, let me change it. Some people have the theory. A lot of the trauma experts have the theory. Actually helping people while you stay present and learn the language of their upset, learn what their upset is seeking and asking for, and learning how to supply those needs through a million different creative ways. Once the need is met, once that person gets that need met that the central nervous system is screaming for. So if it's, hunger, we feed. If it's thirst, we drink. If it's cold, we get warmth. If it's hot, we get cool. If it's fear, we get safety. If it's terror, we get security. So how do I offer this person the security that this fear is seeking? How do I offer this person safety that the terror is talking about? And the world of mindfulness, or the world of securefulness, really does teach the therapist how to speak the language of terror while they're safe. And for a lot of times, if somebody comes to you and they're terrified and you're feeling secure in yourself and safe in yourself, and you're curious about what's going on with them instead of getting frightened yourself, that curiosity, and with the intuition and all the other stuff that mindfulness does, is going to often give you, like, left field ballpark kind of answers and solutions. Like, looking at someone and you notice that their shoulders are way up high and they start to fidget, and you ask the question, do you feel kind of exposed right now, or do you feel a little nervous right now? Which would be basic sensory motor or somatic kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But this is adding into the nurturing state of the therapist more as the role in the therapeutic dyad than the
Hmm.
upset of the client. So if you ask the question, you look like you're feeling nervous, it's because I can tell that they're nervous.
Hmm.
I feel it inside of me. And then I say, okay, can we try this or that? Whatever this or that is usually depends on, do you want a pillow? Do you want to wrap up? What does it feel like would be helpful right now? And often they'll put a blanket on or a hoodie on or a pillow in front of them, which protects their body or surrounds them. And then you start asking sort of the questions, do you notice any difference? And if you get it right, the instantly the person will sort of say, yeah, I feel different. But we got to be careful, because safe isn't safe if you've never felt safe. If you've never not dissociated, all the damage and fear and pain and suffering that's dissociated tend to come flying out, which will make somebody dissociate more. As the EMDR is very well known for this. EMDR can destroy dissociative barriers. And if that person has no securefulness, no scaffolding, nothing to hold the pain and suffering, then they're just going to pop back into the emergency response. So it really is, I know I don't mean to be crass. If you understand securefulness, if you really understand what mindfulness is, if you yourself can find that state and then continue that state when you're working with clients, healing does not become complex. It's very, 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 very hard, super duper counterintuitive, especially in this world, but it's not complicated. And that, you sort of give your clients the benefit of the doubt that every emotion is trying to tell you something. Our job is to figure out how to hear it instead of trying to get rid of it, trying to shame it or distract from it.
Well, I feel like we just scratch the surface of what this is. So are you suggesting that the part of the treatment here requires or demands even more of the therapist
Yes.
than
Yep.
what we commonly know in terms of some of the somatic modalities you mentioned, sensory motor or
Yep.
somatic?
Yeah. So when I first meet a new client, I will say things like, I'm the one with the training. I'm the one who's had years learning the language of affect, which is feelings. I'm the one that is being paid here. I'm the one doing the work. Your job is to show up. However you show up, I don't expect them to trust me, but I trust them because I trust human physiology. I trust the human central nervous system. I trust our evolutionary, the way we evolved as a species. That's what's working in the dyad between me and the client. So everything that client shows me is a language, is a form of communication. And you can't, just like how children can't children incorrectly, clients can't client incorrectly. I can therapize wrong because I know better. They don't. And I think that approaching it with this, that their emotions actually are logical instead of illogical. Somebody who's psychopathic does see emotion as illogical. Emotion, what we typically call affect, which is in our bodies, all the mechanisms for the affective circuitry, all the mechanisms for our sensory motor understanding, these things are fully developed or like nearly fully developed at birth. What we feel as adults is what we feel as infants and children. What is missing is the awareness piece. And even as adults, when we experience a fair amount of emergency cascade defenses, we can still be fairly aware of ourselves or other people. People who are psychopathic don't. They don't have self-awareness. They might know how other people work, but they don't have awareness because they don't have the capacity to do introspection, and they also don't have empathy. Both of these things give us data, tons of data about other people's experiences. And us as a species, we're supposed to take that data and assist and help people when they can't assist and help themselves, which is infancy or traumatized people.
This is,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, no. So the therapist being in a mindful state, not the client. The client will, over time, start to become mindful if you are in this state, because that's our baseline. It's hardwired into most of us. What I'm doing is I'm trusting that person in front of me, that they're not here to mess with me, that they're not manipulating me. If any of those things are happening, that's because that person was taught to do that,
Hmm.
not because they want to do that. I trust, everybody who comes and sees me. These are the hardest working human beings. This is all they think about. This is all they're consumed with. So ever saying somebody that you're treatment resistant is just insulting, terribly insulting, because humans are not treatment resistant. Humans don't have enough nurturing. You give that person nurturing, you meet their needs. If we had care centers that actually were designed to meet people's needs, not part of the DSM, not part of traditional psychology, not part of traditional psychiatry, that are expecting people to behave and act and look like well-functioning psychopaths. They never include all the damage that happens in the wake of someone who's psychopathic. But the ideal of being this robotic, independent, hardworking, fake it till you make it kind of person, those are all traits of psychopathy. Human beings are very emotional. We're very effectively driven. We communicate through how we feel. You learn to speak that language using securefulness. It becomes actually kind of easy. I know that sounds like, but I don't have trouble with this population.
Yeah. There's so much here, and I'm so excited to get this out there. Is this what you wrote about in this book?
There's a chapter, yeah, yeah. I'm in the process, like like everybody else. I'm a female living in a misogynistic patriarchal world. I was in a very, very, very coercively controlling relationship for damn near 30 years. First
Oh
time I
my
met him,
God.
I saw him. And so it was hard for me to write. It was hard for me so I worked a lot to take care of my kids, to take care of my three kids. And it's just now in my early 50s that I sort of have the space and the ability to write. So I'm starting to write more about what this is. There's a couple podcasts, and I'm even, for the very first time, I have my own website that's dedicated to me that I'm in the process of building. So I'm really trying to get this information out because it's common sense.
Right, right. Well, hopefully this episode will play at least a small part in that. So how can people reach you, get in touch
I'm
with you?
I'm gonna send that to it. We can put that because I think it's Christine at christineforner.com, but that's a very new website. So I'll have to double check that. But I will
Okay,
confirm
yes, I have
with you.
christineforner.com. I have that. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will
Awesome.
double check on that. And
Okay.
then, like I said, I'm teaching the course. I think it's March 9th online. And I'll be, all of my classes will be up on my website within the next probably 30 days.
Okay. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Christine, damn. As always, welcome back anytime. Love talking to you, and you're so friggin' inspiring. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anytime.
All right. Take care.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.